When I first met my now husband, I was young, naive, and too curious of a person for my own good. At the time, I was nearly pregnant, and we were living in an apartment with my sister. One day, we were in a conversation about the paranormal. As a child, I had many things happen that I couldn't explain, or that were terrifying, and we were telling stories. My husband was being super skeptical about every story told, so my sister and I, being ignorant, suggested we go buy a Ouija board and show him that spirits were real. I had heard horror stories about the board, even from my own father, but I was that person that had to find out for myself. Oh, how naive and stupid I was. We buy a board and we first took it to a park to try it out, trying to separate it from home. Nothing was happening and we were getting frustrated, so we left for home. After we got home, my sister kept going on about trying it again. Eventually, we agreed and took it to my bedroom to play despite my hesitation. After a few minutes of no responses, the planchette eventually moved to yes, after asking if any spirits were there. We were pretty excited that it was moving, and even tried to debunk it if the other could have moved it to be funny. Right away, the planchette wouldn't answer questions, but kept moving in a figure-8 motion, over and over. We eventually got tired of its lack of response and gave up. A few days later, my sister came to me upset and said that the night before, her door was shaking violently. It was closed and it was like someone was pushing the door back and forth. She seemed pretty freaked out. I just listened, but in my mind, I didn't perceive it as that big of a deal. A few nights later, my husband and I were lying in bed, trying to sleep. All of a sudden, our bedroom door started to shake back and forth, just like my sister described, but it was definitely not as minor as I thought. The door was shaking rapidly and violently. I woke my husband and said, "Look at the door." He just stared at it and said, "What the hell?" He watched it shake for a few minutes, and then it eventually stopped. When it did stop, my husband got up and looked out in the hall and checked on my sister. No one was there, and she was fast asleep. We just kinda shook it off. For months, the door shaking happened to one of us almost every night. We started staying at my parents' house more often, just to avoid the freaky nights. One night, I was about 7 months pregnant at this time. I had taken my husband's kids to school that morning, and I was extremely tired that morning. So when I returned home, I decided to go back to bed for a little while. I was sleeping when I was all of a sudden awoken with a feeling of something crawling, walking along my feet on the bed. I sat up and looked. Nothing was there. I thought I just dreamed it and fell back asleep. Then I was awoken again, thinking something was crawling or walking towards me on the bed. I sat up again. Nothing was there. I told myself it was just a dream again and lay back down. I was trying to fall back asleep when I felt it again. This time, I wasn't asleep. It felt like when a cat walking towards you on a bed, very lightly but distinct like paws. We don't have a cat or an animal due to my severe allergies to them. I shot up in bed and looked, but saw nothing there. And that time, I was really freaked out and realized I wasn't dreaming the first 2 times I felt it, either. I got out of the apartment so fast and refused to go back in until my husband got home. It really shook me up. We moved out of that apartment about a month later. I do believe that something attached to us, as we have had a lot of freaky experiences still, since using that board. But that's for another long story. I would be happy to share if interested. I still wonder if tenants still have the doors shake at night in that apartment, or if it left with me. I won't ever play with a Ouija board, ever again. So this experience still haunts me to this day. But please bear with me. It's a long story and I'm including only the main points, but a lot of things happened. When we were younger, we moved into this really beautiful old house. This house had wooden floors and was very Art Deco, and was said to be built in the 60s. I never liked the house. I always felt this really weird energy in it. I would always see things in the corner of my eyes, and my mom told me that it was my active imagination. Then one night I had this terrifying dream of a woman cutting my mom up in the kitchen and forcing us to eat her for dinner. I didn't want to go anywhere near that kitchen. It got so bad that my mom redid the whole kitchen just so that I would go in there. My sister was always so sick in the house, always getting some sort of illness. And there were always little things that happened with no explanation. You would be showering, and once you got out of the shower, you would see a handprint in the steam on the glass door. We had a sensor in our main lounge that would be active at night for security reasons, and it would always go off. My mom got it, checked to see if bugs were living inside it, but there was nothing. Not even our cats would go into that room. I never could sleep alone for very long. I often would wake up in the middle of the night and would just go sit in my mom's room or my sister's room and wait until morning. Things got really weird after my mom got a divorce and the main male of the house moved out. We started to hear footsteps at night, walking up and down the corridors. There would be tapping coming from under the floorboards like someone was trying to knock from there. I would always see this really tall, dark figure moving around the passageways. And this is when things start to get super freaky though. We went away for a weekend, and when we arrived back, there was these figure people drawn perfectly, consistently, down the frame of our outside door. It was a little girl holding a tall man's hand, and then another little girl holding his hand on the other side. It was so freaky. My mom thought it was either my sister or I, but it really wasn't us. Other strange things would happen, like when you would be in the shower or in the kitchen, the power would just trip, and when you would go try switch it on at the main switch, there was this force holding you back. It got so bad that my mom got our priest to come bless the house. That was helpful because whatever was inside the house did move to the outside. But I often saw a tall man in a black top hat standing in our garden, and then weird things would happen in our art studio outside, like glasses would just split in half, and things would just fall off the walls. We moved out of that house within the next year. My sister and I still speak about what happened in the house, and how it terrified us. I guess I should start with some background. I have always had some occasional paranormal experiences pop up throughout my life. The only one I remember clearly enough to explain well is after my grandmother had passed away. I would feel her presence, not following me around or anything, but in the hallway of her house when I came to visit my grandpa. I didn't see her, but felt a presence watching me that I just knew was her. It was a little scary to feel that presence, but you could just tell that it wasn't anything dangerous, so to speak. As I said, it's hard to explain for everyone to understand. This experience was the same case with a pet that was very close to me after their passing. Weirdly comforting, I guess. Anyway, my father and I moved into our current house about 5 to 6 years ago. It's the same town I have always been in, but a different side, within about 10 miles of the last house. When we first came here, there were a few renovations done, but the most major change was tearing a wall down to make 2 small bedrooms, 1 master bedroom. After a few weeks after we settled in, I started noticing small things. Sometimes cabinet doors would open in the kitchen, shampoo would fall down in the shower, and I even heard footsteps in the basement through my vent occasionally. And the same way I previously explained with my grandmother, it was as if you could feel a presence. One day I was walking to my room, and as I was headed down the hall, I looked over to my father's room and saw for a split second what I can only describe as a soldier in a green uniform. Right where that old wall used to meet, standing there, almost like an image that was of low opacity or a fog. And I could smell cologne that was unfamiliar. It scared the crap out of me, I won't lie, but it genuinely didn't feel like a presence I should fear. He was just there. I made a habit to close my eyes or look away whenever I walked by from then on. One day, in a random conversation, my mother mentioned how she had seen the soldier standing in my dad's room when she visited before. Considering there was no previous mention from either party, you can imagine my shock. She told me she did not want to tell me what she experienced because she figured I would be terrified and want to move. After a long conversation, she decided to announce to the spirit that we did not mind him staying here, so long as we didn't see or hear him. Normally, I wouldn't be too keen on that idea, considering I am a believer, and with that comes bad parts of the paranormal world too. You never know what you're welcoming. But with this, it was different, and you just knew. It was his home too. He wasn't trying to deliberately scare us, that kind of thing. Nothing. No noises, no sightings, not even anything that could be argued as paranormal after that announcement. My mother did some research on the property because she is a big fan of the local history and was genuinely curious. She found out that where this property stands used to be areas of a farmland, and there was an apparent fire within the vicinity of my home. I can't certainly say anyone died here, yet alone in a fire, but there were definitely confirmed families, including soldiers in similar uniforms. We joke once in a while about the soldier when something goes missing, but it's all in good spirits. It's been a few years of nothing happening, and now I have come here out of genuine fear and hope for answers on what had recently been going on. Yes, even with no sightings of the soldier, there was always a feeling of a presence where that wall was torn down. Even in the basement under the area, you feel like you're not alone, but now things are different. Weird noises will come about once in a while that is not made by us or our cat. Not a big deal, but the feeling of a presence in that room has turned a little darker. For the record, my dad's not really a major believer, let alone scared of the paranormal, so him sleeping in this room is fine in his book. But the presence, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. It feels like I should be afraid for my life. Like I'm in danger. It kind of just shifted to that after years of nothing happening. I just pointed it to me being a little overdramatic at first and feeding into a small feeling, but it keeps getting worse. I started noticing I would be in the next room over on my phone while my dad watches TV, and I would jerk my head over to the bedroom hallway because I saw what looked like someone peeking into the living room. It scared me every time. Now I'll be in the kitchen and see something peek out of the master bedroom, walk across the hall into the bathroom. Sometimes it's like a flash, other times a full body apparition. But like I said, it's a terrible feeling and a very dark figure. Sometimes it's abnormally large or tall, and it's always dark. You can't make out even one feature except for size, and the more occurrences, the worse I feel. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like a presence, or a human one, at least. I express my feelings about this presence to some people, but I don't know what to do. I bought some sage from a local shop and researched how to cleanse a house, but I am terrified to do it. I'm afraid of making something mad or doing something wrong. Moving is not an option. We don't really have the expenses to just casually up and switch houses like that. I'd also like to add that I feel like I have always been able to sense a strong presence, but never had a bad one like this within my residency. I've always been able to leave wherever gave me the bad vibes. My father worked hard to buy the 200 acres of land around the Four Corners in Colorado. It was where he went every summer to hunt while my mother, sister, and I went on a cruise, until I was around 6 years old and we moved there from California. The land and the house were gorgeous. Waking up to deer drinking from the pond, I was lucky enough to have horses, goats, sheep, ducks, and a lot of cats, 22 to be exact. What more could a little girl from the city wish for? In the city I shared bunk beds with my sister, but here, I had my own room and my own bathroom. If you've ever been out in the middle of nowhere, it's dark, very dark, which is terrifying. Add the coyotes howling and the bobcats screaming. I often ended up in bed with my mom. That did not last long. I needed to be a big girl, my parents said. So I put on my big girl pants. My mom would put anointing oil on my head every night and pray over me. I don't know if that is what triggered Pete. The first night I saw something. It was a light, which is odd. You would have to follow very detailed directions to get to our home, and no family ever showed up in the middle of the night. I thought nothing of it and went back to bed. Almost every night from then on, the light got closer. When I told my parents, I was told it was most likely the moon reflecting off the tractor out in the front. Kids have imaginations or imaginary friends. Maybe all that normal parent advice you tell your kids. Until that night, the glow was on the porch, right outside my window. It was bright, and I could tell that it was getting closer, slowly. When I saw his face, he peered into my window, then moved right in front of it, and just stood there. I didn't scream or get out of bed. I just kept eye contact, because I felt mesmerized. I don't know for how long we just stared at each other, but I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I told my dad, who just got off of work. He asked me to describe the man, so I did as best as I could. About as tall as my dad, 5'8", older with gray hair, very deep blue eyes. I didn't understand until I was older the change in his face was because he went pale. He told me we would talk when I get home from school, and we did. He asked me to describe him again and try to remember everything I possibly could, and I remembered he was wearing overalls, kind of like the ones my dad's uncle, who owned the farm next to us, did. He told me everything would be okay, to do my homework, so I sat at the dining room table and started my homework. It wasn't much later I heard a loud crash outside. When I ran outside to see what it was, my father had a sledgehammer and was tearing down the small shed that was not that far from our home. He told me to go back inside, so I did. Later on, he came in the house and with a small envelope. By now, my mom was out of bed and asking what all the fuss was about. We all sat down and my dad opened it, and there were 2 IDs and immigration papers and a map. That is when I learned his name. I just knew it was him. I had that gut feeling. Remember how I said my father's uncle lived on the land next to us? Well, he grew up there and was in his late 60s. We paid him a visit and my father showed him what he found, and he was very surprised and remembered Pete from when he was a kid and would ride his horse past his property to go to school. According to him, Pete and his wife were from Russia and kept to themselves. There were a ton of rumors about them, but nobody really knew anything. He looked at the map and asked my father if he had looked around the property yet. My dad said no, but now that he had a plan to check out the woods in the front of our property the next morning. Everyone was excited. There were so many rumors about this strange Russian man that lived in the middle of nowhere back in the day. The next morning they started digging. I wasn't allowed to help, so I just watched. Finally, after some time, they hit something in the ground. They brought it up, and it was a big chest. Now, being a Muppet Treasure Island lover, I was excited, until they opened it and screamed for me to run. I was confused, but always listened to my father and ran towards the house, and told my mom, who was very worried. We both ran onto the porch to see my dad and great uncle put the chest in the back of his truck and sped off. Those couple of hours were hell for both of us. When my father finally made it home, he told us it was dynamite, a lot of it. They disposed of it, and that's when the evil starts. The weird noises, things moving around, animals going crazy for no reason, and Pete's face always coming through the ceiling. Then the nightmares, oh my god, they were horrible. Plus all the strange accidents, like the tractor starting on its own and almost running my dad over. My mom was so scared one night she had a heart attack. I know she was a smoker and that was a factor, but she would never tell me what she saw, even as an adult. We moved back to California not long after that. I've seen him a handful of times since peering in my window, or just standing in the corner of my room. He's never spoke. I don't know what he wants, but I'm happy I haven't seen him in years. So Pete, if you can read this, I hope you found peace. So I got a comment about wanting to know more about this situation. I was very young when this all happened, and it caused a huge uproar in the small community we lived by, and everyone thought there was gold buried on our land. I only found that out after my father passed away when I was 11. Multiple people tore the land apart, so yes, I think there was more to it than just dynamite. Why else would people tear up my father's land while my father was in the hospital in a coma? As for Pete, the rumors I heard growing up in that area is that he ran from Russia after stealing from a gold mine. If it's all true, I doubt my father wouldn't have lied. He was genuinely scared when he told me to run. All that land was sold when he passed. Myself and my siblings got decent money. I'd prefer the land, but I was 11 and had no say-so in the issues. My dad's cousin bought the land and actually still owns it to this day. He just wanted to keep it in the family. I don't think he's ever tried looking for anything. As for it not being dynamite, I've always thought about that. Pete was not buried in the local cemetery, and no one ever saw or found remains of his wife. Her papers were all there, but no trace of her or him. My father was born in 44, so his uncle was born maybe in the 20s. I grew up in the Philippines, and I'm used to powerful typhoons crossing our country. While my hometown is rarely visited by typhoons due to its geographical location, near the equator due to the Coriolis effect, watching the news about the aftermath of the typhoon was just a mundane scene. But on the 8th of November 2013, the entire country was reeling from what could have been the strongest typhoon of the century. Super Typhoon Yolanda, international name Haiyan, wreaked unimaginable havoc in central Philippines. Tacloban City, the regional center of Region 8, was the worst hit. The disaster claimed more than 10,000 lives, destroyed millions of dollars worth of crops and properties, and displaced millions of people. The locals are used to typhoons as the region's located at the eastern seaboard of the country. However, everyone got caught off guard by the storm surge. No one was aware about the imminent danger days before Haiyan struck the region. No one listened nor cared about the impending danger of the storm surge, which was reiterated a number of times by National Weather Bureau. Thousands of rotting corpses lay along the highway towards the airport, which is located at the peninsular part of the city, sandwiched between two bodies of water. Search and rescue operations were futile as well. The entire city reeked of death and despair. It felt like it was a scene straight out of a high-budget Hollywood disaster movie. Only that this one happened in real life. Horrible was an understatement. On March 2nd, 2014, I moved to Tacloban City. It was my first facility assignment after I finished my training as an air traffic controller. First job, first facility assignment, I was feeling excited at that time, and all the terrible things I've read and heard about the city was briefly covered by excitement. The city during the time still had an unstable electricity connection, except for the airport. As day turns to night, the city is plunged into darkness, and it becomes eerily quiet. I stayed at the 3rd floor of the control tower since the staff house was totally damaged by the storm surge. On the 3rd night, I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning. As I opened my eyes, I saw a tall, dark figure standing at the front of my bed. At first, I thought it was our office assistant. We were 3 to a room that time. The figure wasn't moving, and I felt like it was staring at me. The room was dimly lit, all thanks to the moon's illumination, but it was clear as day that the figure wasn't our office assistant. I just shrugged it off, thinking that my mind was just playing tricks. The next day, I told my experience to my other roommate, my colleague, and happens to have a strong sixth sense. She nonchalantly said, "We're 6 inside our room. The other 3 are just lost souls, probably typhoon victims. Just pray." The hair on my arms just rose. Weeks later, my colleague and I were the only ones inside the room. We were both on our laptops, doing our own businesses, when suddenly we smelled something. It was a sharp, distinct smell of an orchid. I got anxious and asked my colleague if she smelled something. From her body language, I can sense she was really scared. She leaned on me and whispered, "She's in front of you. Don't forget to pray for her eternal repose." I thought she was joking, but I was feeling cold that time. I prayed hard that night. The following day, I asked one of the airport employees if he knew someone who loves orchids. We have a former employee who used to plant orchids and other flowers near the control tower. She died during Yolanda, he said. The hauntings continued, but eventually, I got used to it. I occasionally got to the city's cathedral and light a candle for the eternal repose of the lost souls around the airport. Fast forward to the 7th of November 2014. On the eve of the Yolanda High-End anniversary, I rode a jeepney from downtown to the airport. It was just one ride away, around 30 minutes with traffic. For those who didn't know, a jeepney is a mode of transportation in the Philippines. Passengers would sit in front of each other, and the jeep usually has a capacity of 20 passengers, 10 on each side. I was at downtown doing some errands. By 6 p.m. it was getting dark, and hailed a jeep that would take me straight to the airport. The airport is the last stop, so basically, most passengers would alight before me. As we neared the airport, we were only 4 left inside the jeepney. I was seated near the driver, while the other 3 were seated in the middle part. As we neared the airport, the highway became dark. The street lights weren't working, and there were only a few people walking along the street. The 3 other passengers, 2 adult males, a female, and 1 male child, probably 7 or 8 years old, were dressed in an ordinary way. Nothing spectacular, to be honest. I assumed they were local fishermen along the area. Suddenly, the adult male shouted, "Lugar lang," which means that the driver should stop, since the family would alight the jeep in the next few seconds. I thought the driver didn't hear, maybe because of the loud roar of the jeep's engine, so I told him to stop. He did and asked me, "You going down, kid? I thought you were going to alight at the airport." I told him that the 3 passengers will alight here, not me. What he did next was truly terrifying. He started to speed up. The road was still dark, however, from the distance, I could already see the runway lights. We were near the airport. I could sense something was wrong. The other passengers were nowhere to be found, and I thought they went down when the jeep stopped momentarily minutes ago. The driver didn't utter a word. I began to break into a cold sweat. My heart began to pound. When we finally arrived at the airport, the facade of the terminal was brightly illuminated by LED lights. Finally, I saw his face. He was terrified. I gave him the fare, and told me something that made my hair raise. He said, "You were completely alone even before the dim part of the road. When you told me someone will alight, I sped up. I've heard stories from other drivers, just like this one. Did you see them?" I nodded nervously. They might be one of the typhoon victims. Some say they aren't aware they're already dead. Please pray for their eternal repose. As I alight the Jeep, I noticed that the seat where the other passengers sat a while ago was wet. It didn't rain that time. It seemed that someone spilled a bottle of water or something. And then it dawned on me. They were indeed the lost souls of the area. Remember that the entire city was inundated by the storm surge as tall as a 3-story building. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Perhaps click the bell for notifications, and remember, hell is empty, and the devils are here.